So we're going to start talking about the first section today, which is a first look at interpersonal communication. What are we covering today? We're going to cover psychological and communicative imperatives, which include Maslow's hierarchy of needs and effective participation in society. We're going to cover models of communication, which included the linear model, an interactive model, and a transactional model. And then other matters that we're going to discuss today include trying to make at least the first stab at defining interpersonal communication, features, principles, and guidelines of interpersonal communication. That's what we're covering. As we get started in the first part of this, you're going to see the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The likelihood is all of you have seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs before, and this probably isn't the first time you've been exposed to it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is usually covered in just about every psychology class you will take, whether it's high school or college. It's going to be covered in most sociology classes and, of course, communication courses. When we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the things that, as we start looking through this as a quick review, we suggest that people, as we grow, and as we start looking around to live, we have a certain number of needs that actually have a hierarchy. We require and will think about our physical needs first: air, food, sex, the continuation of the species. Safety and protection, secondly, after, and only after the first group is finished, and we've got that taken care of. Belonging after that, which includes inclusion and fun, and how do I actually get along with other people. Self-esteem needs, and self-actualization being the final. It is suggested that not everybody gets to self-actualization. This is, in some cases, the whole giving back issue. Maslow describes it as the most abstract human need, fully developing and using our unique talents, capacities, and potentialities. To achieve this, we need to refine talents that we have already developed to some degree, while we also cultivate new potentials in ourselves. So why is this important for us to look at? Two reasons. The first, pardon me, is that in order to accomplish any of these, because we live in a society with other human beings, communication is required with each other in order to get these things accomplished. Or it just doesn't happen. The second, refining communication skills also has a hierarchy, doesn't it? Refining communication skills also has a hierarchy. There is a particular political gesture that was popularized by John F. Kennedy and then copied and again popularized by Bill Clinton. Now, whether or not you like or dislike Bill Clinton, it's incredibly difficult to argue that he was a horrible public speaker, because the reverse is actually true. The man could captivate audiences really well. Now think about this for a moment. He has a particular gesture when he speaks that is quite profound. It would be one thing if, while giving a speech, trying to motivate people, I had a fist here, right? I have a fist here, and if I throw a fist around, it looks like I'm trying to get people antagonized. It looks like I might be trying to get them ready for a fight. I could give the thumbs up to folks, and when I give a presentation, if I'm giving a lot of thumbs up, I could make it look like I agree with everything that's being said. That may not be the case. I could speak while pointing my finger. Now here's an interesting thing. Even while I'm pointing my finger at people, even probably here right now, you're probably thinking and having that reaction of, don't point your finger at me. Why? Because when we were growing up, the likelihood is somebody who was responsible for disciplining us was pointing that finger. Now, is that something to pay attention to as a public speaker? Sure it is. But what happens if I have trouble because I'm just barely able to give a presentation of any kind? So when I come up here and I'm doing a little bit of nervous shake because the physical manifestations of speech anxiety gets to me, and I have real trouble with it, and so I'm barely able to get up in front of a group and speak 5 or 6 lines of script that I'm reading from, and then you have to go sit down. Do the detailed gestures of my hand matter to me at that stage? No. Because there is a hierarchy of communication skill, whether it's interpersonal or whether it's public speaking. Now, Bill Clinton, go back to this story. One of the things you will recognize from Bill Clinton's presentation is he took maybe all 3 of those gestures, the fist, the thumb, and the point, and he actually came up with the best. Was advised, I would more likely like to say, was advised by political advisors and speech coaches, came up with the best of all worlds, and you will recognize this. As he speaks, he has a tendency to wrap his finger around his thumb in a closed fist and uses this as he speaks. And it has a profound effect as people look at it and think much more about, depending on what he's talking about, either he's making a point, giving the thumbs up, or making that fist. And it's all of these and greater than all those all at the same time, isn't it? And he's done an amazing job. But these are skills that if we look at a hierarchy of speech skills instead of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are skills we can't pay attention to until we've mastered more basic skills. So why is this brought up? 2 reasons. Number 1, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the needs that we have in everyday life and society can't be accomplished without communication. And number 2, there is a hierarchy of communication skills that we need to pay attention to, and which is, again, one of the reasons why we're in a class like this. So whether it's public speaking or whether it's dealing with each other on an interpersonal level, we begin to recognize that there are skills that need to be accomplished that we get into as we go along. People often say to me, I know how to talk, why do I need a communication course? My response is always the same. I know how to breathe, it doesn't make me a pulmonologist. There's an awful lot to it, and a lot of study about it. And just because you think you've mastered the basics doesn't mean you have a clue when it comes to more advanced work. Okay. Secondly, participating effectively in a diverse society. I didn't grow up in the same culture you did. Any of you. Co-cultures, anyone, right? We could live right next door and have grown up on the same street, and your family rituals may very well be different than my family rituals, and I live next door. As such, we have a tendency to communicate differently than other people. And if we might communicate differently with other people from within our own neighborhood, what do you think are the odds that we're able to communicate effectively or the same with people on the other side of the planet? Probably not well. Not good odds, right? And so we have to learn. What is this? Marker. It's a marker. Is there anything intrinsic about the word marker that specifically means this?
It marks.
The answer to the question is no. If we decided today to call this item, collectively, we all decided we were going to call this item an apple. What is this? It's an apple. There is no intrinsic connection between a word and its referent. We had to at one point decide. We decided what a marker was. We had to decide at one point what the word marks mean. And that word, whatever the grunted word, it's a symbol, right? Language is made of symbols. Whatever that grunted word, marker, or whatever else it might be in another language, okay, it's not the same. In a different language, this is not called marker. Different languages will have different words, and as a consequence, we speak different languages and different around the world, and as such, there's an important reason why we need to learn to interpersonally communicate with each other in a diverse world, because we are indeed diverse. It's not a matter of everybody understanding the same language. And language and culture are intertwined. Different languages often bring about different cultures, different languages. We have to learn all that. And we just can't operate and communicate with someone from a different culture just as if they're from our culture or from next door. That can be a problem. Okay. We're going to talk about models of communication. First one that we talk about is that linear model, which basically means we have a sender, a message, receiver, right? Sender, message, receiver. And of course, more detailed, it talks about an information source, a message created, a transmitter to send the message, a signal on which the message will ride, the received signal at some sort of receiver, and the message destination finally at the end. What does this sound like? Broadcasting, doesn't it? Television is done this way. Radio is done this way. Podcasts are done this way. Where the message is created somewhere, and then on some sort of route it goes to a final destination. What does this imply? It implies that the receiver is a passive participant. So this implies that in communication, the receiver is a passive participant, and that communication only goes in one direction. Are there flaws here? Can you see very obvious flaws here with respect to interpersonal communication? I think so. And then, of course, we're talking about having a lot of this interrupted by noise. And noise, it goes throughout all the models, but let's talk about noise for the moment. What is noise? Now, you might think immediately, noise, it's that loud stuff that hits the ears. Well, in this case, we're talking about noise being anything that distorts the communication. Anything that distorts the communication so that it is harder for effective communication to be understood. Let's talk about 6 types of noise. The first one is the one you're probably most familiar with when you hear the word noise. Physical noise. Physical noise. Now, this might be something as interruptive as an air conditioner starting while we're speaking and having a conversation in a classroom. And the air conditioner might be loud enough that it affects you hearing my words as I'm trying to vocalize. As such, I have to speak louder. I used to teach in Saudi Arabia. There was at least on one occasion where we were teaching in northern Saudi Arabia where we were in some tents. And while we were in some tents, having class, some of the students had brought their camels and their camels were making all kinds of noises because they were mating outside the tent. They're not quiet. Physical noise. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone at a rock concert? And it's just so loud that you can't hear a word that's going on. Physical noise. All right, so physical noise is pretty easy to grasp. What do we mean by physical noise? How about physiological noise? Physiological noise. Now, those of you that are planning on taking nursing courses and the like and are into biology, you might understand the term anatomy and physiology. What does physiology mean? It means our body, the processes that our body gets involved in, right? So what is it about a person's physicality that might cause someone not to understand the message that's being given at that time? They might be deaf, right? They might have a physical hearing impairment.
Or if their ears are ringing all the time.
If their ears if their ears are ringing all the time, that would also do it. They might be blind or have vision impairment. They might not be able to speak well, as far as having a dumb effect or something where they've lost some vocal issues. It might be something more temporary and not permanent. It might be something like they've got a head cold and they're just all stuffed up. Maybe they've taken so many antihistamines, they're in that antihistamine fog and they just can't focus. Something about their physiology is affecting the communication. Physiological noise. How about psychological noise? Psychological noise. What's going on in your head? You came to class today, you came to hear me speak, however, you have a test in math in the next hour after this class. You spent the whole night going and running math formulas through your head, and you're thinking about the test that you're going to have in the next hour. Are you fully present in the moment here, right now? Not if that's the case. You're running math formulas in your head. You have speech class after this one. You're getting up and getting ready to give a speech right after this class. Are you fully present in the moment? No, you're running your speech notes through your head. Something about your psychology is distracting you from being fully present in the communication. Along with that one, we have emotional noise. Just before the hour before you came to this class, your significant other broke up with you. You weren't ready to break up. You were very happy in that relationship. Are you fully present in this class? There's a lot of feelings going through you at this point. A lot of issues that you're having to deal with in your own head, and your emotions are perhaps going a little bit nuts. That's emotional noise. You can't be fully present. It's difficult to be fully present in the conversation here right now. How about environmental noise? Is there something about the temperature in the room that makes it too hot or too cold to really pay attention? Is there something about the colors of the walls or the lighting in the room that actually seems to distract you from paying attention? Is there something about the way the room is shaped, or the lack of desks and chairs, or the order of the desks and chairs that cause you to not be fully present in the moment? And if there is, we're talking about environmental noise. One of the common examples I like to use to describe this one is the idea that there have been occasions where at least I have been having a conversation with somebody in a house in the middle of a thunderstorm. It's dark outside. Lightning hits the transformer, boom, and the conversation that we're having at that point just seems to get stalled very quickly when the lights go out like that. And now I can't see you. And now I can't gauge your reactions to the conversation like I might have been consciously or unconsciously doing up until this point. And as such, we're talking about environmental noise. And then finally, semantic noise. Semantic noise. Language noise, so to speak. Does an accent or a dialect get in the way of understanding the communication? Now, dialect, we're talking about regional ways of speaking the primary language. There are 7 countries in the world where English is the primary language. Do all those countries speak English in exactly the same way? We don't even speak English in exactly the same way from one part of the United States to the other part of the United States. Dialect are the variations in speaking the primary language. Can that cause communication understanding problems? Yes. Is that semantic noise? Of course it is. How about accents? Accents are primary language influences on second language acquisition. For people with whom English is not their first language, have you spoken to people with whom, for example, Chinese is their first language, or Spanish is their first language, or Polish is their first language, and you hear influences in the way they speak their English that must have come from their first language learning? Accents. Regionalisms. Different phrases that might be used from one part of the country to the other. For example, when I first got hired at Somerset Community College 3.5 years ago, I ran down here because I was told you have a week to be here and be in classes. We hired you late. It's okay. And I came to the college and I created my syllabi, and I went to the student work study who was working for our department at the time, and I asked, would you be so kind as to make X number of copies of these syllabi so I can be prepared next week? And the young lady looked at me and said, I don't care to. I picked up the syllabi and started walking away. And she looked at me like I was crazy. You know what I don't care to sounds like to a northerner?
You don't care what you do now.
It's not my job. I'm not going to do it. I don't care. And some of you are already looking at me like I'm crazy. But the fact is, it was my understanding from what she said that it must not have been her job, and I was going to go find either someone else to help me with them, or I was going to have to do them myself. And she called me back and said, what are you doing? Where are you going? And I looked at her and I said, well, if you don't care to, I'll just go find another way of doing this. And she looked at me again like I was crazy. She said, I said I would do it. I said, how did you say you were going to do it? Regionalisms cause semantic noise. It's not a phrase we use in the North, or at least the northern part of the country where I'm from. The worst part about that was, about a month later, I had a student in one of my other classes who was trying to be helpful, and I perhaps embarrassed in the class because I walked in the class, the student said, Dr. Mike, for the presentation that we have to do in pairs, the other student, who he called by name, doesn't seem to be coming back to class. This student, who he called by name, has to do their paired presentation, doesn't have the other half of their pair here. I don't care to help them if that's okay. I had forgotten about the initial conversation I had with my work study and couldn't believe why this student would go out of their way to tell publicly everyone that they weren't interested in helping when it wasn't their job to begin with, and said as much. And the look of horror and embarrassment on their faces brought me back to the realization very quickly about the previous conversation I had with the work study student. and realize at that point that this dude was volunteering. Not publicly saying, hey, that person has a job to do and I'm not going to help them. Nanny, nanny, boo-boo. They were actually volunteering to help. Semantic noise. Techno-jargon might be some of this, right? If I have technical terminology that I'm going to toss out, that I'm going to use. Okay, if your audience doesn't understand it, whether that's an audience of one or many, that's semantic noise. Okay. The next model of communication, and all these models will include noise. The next model of communication we want to talk about is the interactive model. And the interactive model, where we're talking about an encoder, one who creates the message, okay, which is a source, sends the message to a decoder or receiver, who then becomes an encoder to send back feedback back to the encoder, who now becomes a decoder. And all of this is supposed to take place within a field of context, a field of experience. What's the problem here? The problem here is that it is communication at this point. Although we acknowledge that there is a receiver and they are important, they're not just passive. The problem here is that we're looking at communication as being a sequential process where one step happens, then the other step happens, then the other step happens. In a cycle, what I'm going to suggest to you, that communication is probably more simultaneous than that. It doesn't happen in a cycle. Don't you suppose that while I am communicating with you, I'm looking at many of your faces and gauging, are you able to follow what I'm saying, or are there issues? And if I'm all of a sudden getting a lot of puzzled looks, I either realize I'm now speaking a foreign language and none of you understand that language. I'm talking in techno-jargon, in words that may be higher or out of a different vocabulary than what you're accustomed to, or you're not following anything I'm saying, so it's time to take a step back to where I do believe that we were following and still together and try a different approach. But this happens simultaneously. I'm looking at it and you're immediately giving me feedback, and I'm gauging much of what I say back to you based on that feedback. The interactive model suggests that that simultaneous interaction doesn't take place, that it's still a sequence of events. That's the problem. Finally, we're going to look at the transactional model. The transactional model emphasizes what we call the dynamism of interpersonal communication, the multiple roles people assume during the process, and specifically includes the feature of time. So we have communicator A's field of experience. This is communicator A. This is the first person in the interpersonal interaction and all the experience by which they have, all within some sort of circle, right? We have communicator B's field of experience. Now, at this point, we can add that center section is a shared field of experience. Even if I've never met you, there are some things that I understand about you that we share. If you're in this class, I know you speak English. Maybe your second language, maybe your first, but I know you speak English. If you're in this class, you're currently residing in the United States, and I would go as far as to suggest that you're currently residing in South Central Kentucky. Because it would be very difficult to travel back and forth from too much farther than South Central Kentucky in order to come to this class as you are right now, unless of course you're on the online course. That's enough to start. Now, if you happen to catch one of your peers in the class at the grocery store, Kroger, Walmart, or any of these places, and you get a chance to recognize each other, you have some things that you can already talk about. The weather, how cold or how hot it might be, how stormy it might be. You can talk about the fact that you're both in the class together. You can talk about the fact that you either like or dislike the instructor. The requirements of the class. And that gives us a place to start, doesn't it? Now, of course, we're talking about noise here. Noise has a tendency to affect all of this as well. And we're talking about time. Time 1, time 2, and however it goes. But this has a tendency to increase over time. And so the more I know you and the more we share experiences, our shared field of experience grows. Our shared field of experience grows. And this is why, and here's the kicker in most of this, this is why we can confidently say that any conversation that I have with any single individual is a continuation of every conversation I've ever had with that same individual. Any conversation that I have with an individual is a continuation of every conversation I've ever had with that individual. Because over time, our shared field of experience grows. We can develop what some people would call inside jokes, because I can refer with a word or two to an experience we shared together previously that a third party who might be available to the later conversation wouldn't have any idea what I'm referring to. So that's the transactional model. Now, with respect to defining communication, one of the things we have to pay attention to is that any definition of interpersonal communication has to account for the what that happens between people. It used to be historically that the communication discipline used to define interpersonal communication as communication that happens between two people specifically. Yeah, sure, maybe. But I think it's more important to pay attention to the what that transpires between two people, rather than the where or the how many. Can I interpersonally communicate in today's day and age with someone who's not currently in the same room with me? Yeah, of course I can. Whether it's by telephone, email, text messaging, etc. I can communicate right now in real time with somebody who's not in the room. Can it be of a personal nature? Sure it can. Doesn't have to be anything else. So when we talk about defining communication, which is a distinct form of communication between two people, we're talking about defining it by the what that happens, not the where or the how many. So when we say, oh, interpersonal communication, traditionally, historically, people have always liked to define it as, oh, that's two people. Maybe. And some theorists and communication scholars will still define it by the number of people. But it's more important to pay attention to the what that occurs between them. And when we talk about the what that occurs between them, here we're talking about, and this is where it's introduced the whole concept of the philosopher Martin Buber, and what he refers to as the I-it continuum, the I-you, and the I-thou relationship. A continuum that spans how we look at people and have conversations with people. I-it. There's no real interaction that I have with with people that I have an I-it conversation or I-it relationship with. I don't have conversations with them. I might see them walking in the street, and the mere fact that I acknowledge there's a human being over there, does that human being mean anything to me? Perhaps not. I may never have a conversation with that person, may never see that person again. And in reality, is that person any different than the tree or the rock or the car that I see in the street? Probably not. In reality, these people are merely objects. The I-it relationship. The I-you, where people start to become recognized as individuals. And this is probably the relationship we have with the majority of the people that we interact with on a regular basis. I know you. I might know your name. I might not know your name, but you are a functionary. I recognize you as a human being. You know, this may be when I travel somewhere, I get off an airplane, I get my suitcase, I get into a taxi. What conversation am I going to have with the taxi driver? I can pretty much tell you how the conversation is specifically going to go. I'll tell that person where I'm headed. They'll give me some indication about how long it's going to take to get there. And en route, we might start talking about very small things like the weather, the travel, how busy the traffic is, things that are very shallow and just very obvious. Is there any likelihood that that person is going to start telling me about their 3 divorces and 6 surgeries? Any likelihood? Yeah, there's some likelihood. And if they start, are you going to think, whoa, too much information, that's just a little bit too creepy for me? Probably. Just the same way we would do that, we would think way too much information to the person directly behind us in line at the grocery store who wants to tell us all about their bad relationship and their breakup. And all you wanted to do was buy eggs and milk. So the I-you, we might have relationships with people that we recognize and that we might interact with. Cashiers, wait staff at restaurants, bartenders, gas station attendants, classmates, teachers. Most people that we would interact with. I-you. The I-thou relationship, as far as, again, defining interpersonal communication as the what, the I-thou relationship is reserved for relationships that we see people as cherished, unique, and significant. Cherished, unique, and significant. We have very different conversations with those people than we have with people in the I-you category, don't we? Here's where we would expect to have all those conversations about surgeries, personal problems, relationship problems, because we might be having those relationship problems with those people. Okay. I see you as cherished and unique. And so it's beyond just the social roles and gets much more into the significant others' lives. That's the I-thou relationship. Okay, well, featured, yeah.
Those, like you're in an I-you relationship, can it kind of go into the other type?
Oh, absolutely.
That's where time comes.
Yeah, this is where time comes in, and we certainly might start here.
Yeah.
But you might meet a classmate that you kept in contact with, and 3 or 4 years later you start dating, and 3 or 4 years after that maybe all of a sudden you're married to, and yeah, it certainly can. Now, it is through communication, of course, that relationships are maintained, started, maintained, and even destroyed, ended, right? It is through communication that we might wind up going up and down this.
Yeah, with the same person.
With the same person, it's possible. All right, features of interpersonal communication. Number one, it's selective. When I look at the I it, the I you, and the I thou, I have to realize, based on what we just talked about, your question for that matter, that the I thou relationship is going to take a whole lot more of my time, effort, energy, etc. than the I you. And certainly the I you will take more time, effort, and energy than the I it. Communication, interpersonal communication is selective. Who am I choosing to spend that time with and expend that energy with? It's also systemic. It takes place within contexts, and in the context offers meaning. What do I mean by that? Think about this for a moment. I go out and I buy this beautiful necklace. And I take this necklace and I give it to a woman that I know. That gift means something to that person, and it means something within the context, doesn't it? It means something very different if it's my mother or my sister, as compared to if it is a woman I just met, as compared to a woman I've been dating for years, as compared to a woman I've been married to for 20 years, as compared to a woman who might be married to somebody else. Do you see how that context can drastically change the meaning of that action or those words? Okay. As we talked about here, when we talk about the I, thou, and the I, you issue, interpersonal communication is rather unique. For those people that I choose to spend so much time with respect to the I, thou relationship, for instance, I am recognizing those people as unique, and they're not like anybody else, because I know that much more about them. So I'm dealing with unique individuals. It's processual. There is a procession involved here. Communication is a continuous process, both evolving, we hinted at this already, both evolving and devolving all the time. Okay? We maintain, we build, we initiate, we end relationships somehow with communication. Or lack thereof. Communication is transactional. There is an action and a reaction. It's transactional. It's individual. At the deepest levels, especially the I, thou, we engage at the individual and the most personal levels. It concerns personal knowledge, doesn't it? Because to connect with individuals, we learn unique things about them, and we learn about their worries, their concerns, their likes, their dislikes. And because we know all these personal knowledge aspects of them, that affects our responses to them, doesn't it? We don't assume, for example, that everybody likes horses. And so we don't treat everyone as if they love horses, because some people are fearful of horses. But if our significant other with whom we share an I-thou relationship likes horses, my responses to them that may actually have some very serious attainment as to why I'm reacting this way to you when we talk about horses. And finally, interpersonal communication is meaning creating. The basis for relationships are that meanings are shared between people. What does various behaviors and actions say? Hugs, handshakes, inside jokes. We talked about the context and the content meaning of, for example, giving that gift of a necklace to someone. Depending upon who that person is within our realm of relationships, that gift can have very different meanings. Meanings are created in people. They're not created in words. That's important to pay attention to. Meanings are created in people. They're not in words. Think about that for a moment. If I asked you how are you today? And all you did was respond to me with, Does that communicate something to me? Sure it does. Can I find in the dictionary? No. And yet I learned something from that person about their thoughts, about how they are today, with the Have they spoken perhaps volumes to me? Maybe the more they spoke to me, because the more I understand who they are, the more personal knowledge I have of them, the closer we are, the more impactful that means. Meanings are created in people. They're not created in words. All right, so what are the principles of communication? The first, we cannot not communicate. Dr. Mike, you just used a double negative. Of course I did. You cannot not communicate. Everything we do communicates us something. Even if, after I know who you are, you decide not to come to class. That communicates something, because you were expected. Even if you decide you're going to come here, sit here, and just give me this the whole time. I'm not moving, I'm not doing anything, I'm just going to sit here very stoic and not look like I'm not make any gestures whatsoever. That communicates something. Now, crossing the arms might also tell me you're cold. It might also tell me you have no interest in what's going on here. Or it might tell me you're feeling very defensive. As possibilities. And in your mind, you're thinking, I'm sitting here not communicating. Doesn't happen. You cannot not communicate. Interpersonal communication is irreversible. Interpersonal communication is irreversible. Now, those of you that have grown up on video games, sometimes this is a difficult concept to understand. Because when I do something I should not have done in a video game, what's my easiest choice? Restart the game. Clean slate. Start over. There's no such thing in real life. There's no such thing in real life. And in fact, when I was doing some consulting with various attorneys on trials, one of the things that we have to pay attention to is just this: communication is irreversible. And it's a secret that I don't often share. Why is it a secret? Because think about this for a moment. Lawyer comes to me and says, Dr. Mike, I've got a client who I need to prove is guilty. Well, I'm going to take it back. Not a client, but a prosecutor. I got somebody who I need to prove is guilty. This person has a prior history of this activity. The judge has stated, I am not to discuss the prior history. I've got to prove things through other things, but the mere fact that this person has a strong history is highly indicative of this person's current behavior. My question is always this at the time: do you believe truly in your heart of hearts that that person is indeed guilty of what you're accusing them of? Or are you just following the prosecution because you have to? And if they tell me they're following because they have to and they were ordered to, I'm not going to say a word and say, well, you can't say it, can't say it. If they tell me, you know what, I truly believe this is the case, I said, we'll go back and say, okay, now think about this for a moment. If you say, Mr. Smith, it's my understanding that you're a convicted drug dealer. Is that the case? And you're not supposed to say that and bring that prior case up. What is going to immediately happen?
Okay.
The other attorney is going to stand up and say, objection. Right. What's the judge going to say? Objection sustained. Okay? So they've just publicly announced you weren't supposed to say that. What's the judge going to say next? Jury will disregard. Is it possible to just completely forget something like that? So what you have done by saying so and mentioning this, I said, is the judge going to penalize you for it? Oh, he might yell at me. I said, can you take it being yelled at? Yeah, sure. So you can prepare to be yelled at for that? Sure. Do you think it's important for the jury to know that he has a history? Yes. So what you've done by stating it, understanding that communication is irreversible, you can't take that back. And in fact, because of the sequence of events, the way our court theater is set up, you've highlighted it. You don't need to say anymore, do you? Communication is irreversible. But the same thing goes when we deal with interpersonal relationships. I might say something to you that's really hurtful. And if I do, and I regret it, can I truly take it back? I might be able to apologize, but I can't unsay something. You can't unring a bell. It's irreversible. And it's something we need to pay attention to. Interpersonal communication involves ethical choices. Because interpersonal communication is irreversible, and communication affects others, it always has ethical implications. Manipulation and lies to get people to do something, to respond in some way. Does that involve ethical choices? Sure it does. And our communication always involves ethical choices. We've talked about meaning lies in people and not in words. Meta-communication affects meaning. Meta-communication affects meaning. What is meta-communication? Meta-communication is, you ready for this? Communication about communication. Whenever I put the word meta in it, in a word, this is the prefix to a word, I might take what comes after the meta, also put it in front of the meta, change meta to about, and now I've got essentially the same words, right? What is a meta-analysis? It's an analysis about the analysis. Meta-communication. It's communication about the communication. Do you understand? Wow, what did I just say? Do you understand? By saying, do you understand, I am now communicating about my communication. I am engaging in meta-communication. It changes the meaning of the communication itself, doesn't it? You get into an argument with your significant other and you come back after the argument is all over and you say, what? Do you know when I said this, 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 and this? Do you know that I really meant this, this, and this? What are you doing? You're communicating about the communication. Meta-communication. Meta-communication affects meaning. Meaning lies within people, not in the words. And so what we're doing is we're explaining the communication, hopefully for future reference. And it changes the relationship. Interpersonal communication develops and sustains relationships. Develops and sustains relationships. Small talk. It isn't important what I had for lunch. And when somebody asks me, hey, so, especially when you're significant, what'd you have for lunch? And you tell the story of your lunch. Most people are going, who cares? And yet, why do we do that? Because it is in the sharing that relationships are created and maintained. Not necessarily in the context. Because it is in the sharing of small talk where the relationship, where the relational meanings lie, not the content meanings. We know, for example, that relationships are probably in trouble when the small talk stops. And somebody who was very interested in sharing what you had for lunch in trivial matters like this, all of a sudden starts pointing out that's trivial, that's small, it's no big deal, it's not something I want to talk about. And yet they have a history of having talked about it. When that stops, we know the relationship is probably in trouble. Okay. Interpersonal communication is not a panacea. It's not going to cure cancer. It's not going to cure everything. And in fact, in some cultures, discussing relationships, we just don't do it. But knowing that is important, isn't it? And interpersonal communication effectiveness can be learned. interpersonal communication effectiveness can be learned. If we didn't believe so, you wouldn't be asked to take this class. If we didn't believe you can learn better, effective communication, you wouldn't be asked to be in a class like this. Every one of these discussions ends, of course, in guidelines to help better your communication ideas and what should you practice. And so as we start looking and moving forward, they are, number one, develop a range of skills. Not every communication skill is important in every situation, but there are skills in communication that are important to each particular situation. And as such, we should do our best to develop a range of communicative skills. Adapt communication appropriately. Based on various contexts, and context is important, we need to learn to adapt our communication. Engage in dual perspective. Dual perspective is the ability to understand both your own and another's perspective, belief, thought, and feeling. Greater understanding of both my thoughts and feelings, as well as your thoughts and feelings toward anything, will certainly allow us to communicate more effectively. Monitor your communication. We don't always, we act. Sometimes out of instinct, sometimes out of feeling, and we don't think about what we're doing. We should monitor our communication, how we go about what we do. And commit to effective and ethical communication. None of this matters that we talked about today or that we're going to talk about from here on out if we don't choose to commit to the process. A commitment to effective and ethical communication also requires you to respect yourself and your own ideas and your own feelings, just as you honor others.